Om Bhura Bhuvah Svah Tatsavitursvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yonah Prachodayat. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namaste, my dear friends. Today I am starting the series Swami Vivekananda and his message to the mankind. And the first message I am starting from a very eminent book called The Inspired Talks. So, I start the video, first video on this series. Now, Swami Vivekananda is known all over the world as the greatest and most powerful exponent of the Vedanta in modern times. Many have felt the irresistible charm of his eloquence in India and abroad. In the present case, Swamiji did not stand before a vast and critical audience to conquer them by his irrefutable arguments based upon sound logic, his bewitching personality, and his rare gifts of explaining the most abstruse subjects in a most perspicuous manner, accompanied by his cyclonic eloquence, and he was sitting before a few of his already conquered chosen disciples who had begun to see in him their only guide to take them beyond the ocean of ignorance and misery. There he sat in the glory of his own illumining realization, diffusing the balmy rays of his inner light by means of his most sweet and musical voice all about him, softly raising and opening the lotus buds of the hearts of his ardent devotees. Peace reigned all around him. Blessed indeed were those few fortunate souls who had the rare privilege of sitting at the feet of such a great sage and guru. The cyclonic monk was not there carrying everything before him. There sat the peaceful rishi, mildly disseminating the messages of peace and bliss to a few ardent souls fully ripe to receive them. How illumining and solacing were those sweet words coming out of his holy mouth, like the smiling and breezy dawn coming out of the lap of the bright and ruddy east and driving away the darkness before her. If those words had the power to console a few souls, they must have the power to bring comfort to all souls, and blessed be the mother heart of the loving disciple who preserved those saving words and did not allow them to be lost in the abysmal womb of eternity. To Mother Haridasi, Miss E. Ellen Waldo, the whole world should be grateful for those inspired talks of Swamiji which have brought into existence the present volume. There cannot be a better friend, a better guide to all humanity than this. Whoever will taste the nectar in it is sure to know that death has no power over him. May every soul seeking for illumination, rest and peace have recourse to it to end his or her miseries once for all. All who had the blessing of personal contact with Swami Vivekananda are of one accord that those who knew him on the lecture platform only had but a small measure of his true power and greatness. It was in familiar conversation with chosen friends and disciples that came in his most brilliant flashes of illumination, his loftiest flights of eloquence, his utterances of profoundest wisdom. Unfortunately, however, his printed works so far have shown us only Vivekananda the lecturer. Vivekananda the friend, the teacher, the loving master was known only to the happy few who had the rare privilege of sitting at his feet. Glimpses of this side of the great spiritual genius are revealed to us, it is true, in his published letters, but the present volume is the first to give us words spoken by him in the intimacy of an inner circle. They were taken down by Miss S. E. Waldo of New York, who from the early days of the Swami's American mission served him with unremitting devotion. It was to her that dictated his translation and explanation of Patanjali's aphorisms, published in his Raja Yoga, and often has she told me how she would sit for long periods of time watching always to see that the ink on her pen was kept wet, ready to write down the first word that would come as the Swami would emerge from the depths of self-contemplation into which he had plunged to discover the true meaning of the terse Sanskrit phrases. It was she also who prepared all his American publications for the press, and so great was Swami Vivekananda's confidence in her ability that he would pass the typewritten transcriptions of his lectures over to her with the instruction to do with them what she thought best, for his own indifference to the fruits of his work was so extreme that he could not be induced to give even a cursory glance at his recorded words. Through this constant faithful service with heart and brain, the disciple's mind became so at once with the master that even without the aid of shorthand she was able to transcribe his teaching with wonderful fullness and accuracy. As she herself said, it was as if the thought of Swami Vivekananda flowed through her and wrote itself upon the page once when she was reading a portion of these same notes to some tardy arrivals in the Thousand Island Park home. The Swami paced up down the floor, apparently unconscious of what was going on until the travelers had left the room. Then he turned to her and said, "How could you have caught my thought and word so perfectly? It was as if I heard myself speaking. What need of other commendation?" The Ramakrishna Mission of Madras is highly gratified in having been entrusted with the task of presenting these truly inspired talks to the public, and it wishes to express its heartfelt gratitude to each one of those who have aided in making this rich treasure so long hidden the property of all mankind. In the how this inspired talks book came into existence. Now this is the story for the book to come into existence. In the summer of 1893, there landed in Vancouver a young Hindu sannyasi. He was on his way to attend the Parliament of Religions at Chicago, but not as an accredited delegate from any recognized religious organization. Unknown and inexperienced, he had been chosen for his mission by a few earnest young men of Madras who firm in their belief that he better than anyone could worthily represent the ancient religion of India. Literally one who has renounce the Hindu name for a man who gives up everything and devotes himself to the religious life either as a hermit or as a wandering religious teacher. This is the explanation what is the meaning of sannyasi. Okay. Ancient religion of India had gone from door to door soliciting money for his journey. The amount thus collected together with contributions from one or two princes enabled the youthful monk, the then obscure Swami Vivekananda, to set out on his long journey. It required tremendous courage to venture forth on such a mission. To leave the sacred soil of India for a foreign country means far more to a Hindu than we of the West can realize. Especially is this the case with a sannyasi whose whole training is away from the practical material side of life, unused to handling money or to any mode of travel save on his own feet. The Swami was robed and imposed upon at every stage of his journey, until when he finally reached Chicago he was nearly penniless. He had brought with him no letters of introduction and knew no one in the great city. Thus alone among strangers thousands of miles from his own country, it was a situation to daunt even a strong man. But the Swami left the matter in the hands of the Lord, firm in his faith that divine protection would never fail him. For nearly a fortnight he was able to meet the exorbitant demands of his hotel keeper and others. Then the small sum still in his possession was reduced to such meager proportions that he realized that if he did not wish to die of starvation in the street, he must at once seek a place where the cost of living would be less. It was very hard for him to abandon the task which he had so bravely undertaken. For a moment a wave of discouragement and doubt swept over him, and he began to wonder why he had been so foolish as to listen to those few hot-headed schoolboys of Madras. Yet since no other course was left to him, with a sad heart he set out for Boston, determined to cable for money and if need be return to India. But the Lord in whom he so firmly trusted willed otherwise. On the train he met an old lady and so far awakened her friendly interest that she invited him to become a guest in her house. Here he made the acquaintance of a professor from Harvard University who, after being closeted with Swami for 4 hours one day, was so deeply impressed with his rare ability that he asked him why he did not represent Hinduism at the Chicago Parliament of Religions. The Swami explained his difficulties, that he had neither money nor letter of introduction to any one connected with the Parliament. Mr. Bonney is my friend. I will give you a letter to him. The professor quickly replied, and at once he wrote it, declaring in the course of it that he had found this unknown Hindu monk more learned than all our learned men put together. With this letter and a ticket presented by the professor, the Swami returned to Chicago and was readily accepted as a delegate. At last the day of the opening of the Parliament arrived, and Swami Vivekananda took his place in the line of Oriental delegates who filed out on the platform at the opening session. His purpose was accomplished, but as he caught sight of that vast audience, a sudden nervousness seized him. All the others had prepared speeches, he had none. What should he say to that great gathering of 6,000 or 7,000 men and women? Throughout the morning he kept putting off his turn to be introduced, whispering each time to the president, "Let someone else speak first. So again in the afternoon until about 5 when Dr. Barrows, rising, named him as the next speaker. The shock steadied the nerves and stimulated the courage of Vivekananda, and he at once rose to the occasion. It was the first time in his life that he had ever stood upon his feet to speak or had addressed a large audience, but the effect was electric. When he looked over the sea of expectant faces, he was filled with power and eloquence, and beginning in his musical voice, he addressed his hearers as sisters and brothers of America. His success was immediate, and during all the rest of the Congress, his popularity never waned. He was always eagerly listened to, and people would remain to the end of long session on a hot day or in order to hear him. This was the beginning of his work in the United States. After the Parliament was over, in order to provide for his necessities, the Swami accepted an offer from a lecture bureau to make a tour through the West. Although he attracted large audiences, he soon gave up the uncongenial work. He was here as a religious teacher, not as a popular lecturer on secular subjects. So he quickly abandoned a most profitable career and early in 1894 came to New York to start on his real mission. He first visited friends who had made in Chicago. They were chiefly among the wealthier class, and he spoke now and then in their parlors, but this too failed to satisfy him. He felt that the interest he awakened was not what he wanted. It was too superficial, too much mere amusement seeking. Therefore, he decided to have a place of his own where all earnest truth seekers, whether rich or poor, would be free to come. A lecture before the Brooklyn Ethical Association led naturally to this independent teaching. Dr. Lewis G. James, the president of the association, had heard the young Hindu monk and much attracted by his ability as well as by his message to us of the Western Hemisphere, had invited him to speak before the association. It was on the last day of 1894 a large audience filled the Pouch Mansion where the Ethical Association then held its meetings. The lecture was on Hinduism, and as the Swami in his long robe and turban expounded the ancient religion of his native land, the interest grew so deep that at the close of the evening there was an insistent demand for regular classes in Brooklyn. The Swami graciously acceded, and a series of class meetings was held and several public lectures were given in the Pouch Mansion and elsewhere. A few of those who had heard him in Brooklyn now began to go to the place where he lived in New York. It was just an ordinary room on the second floor of a lodging house, and as the classes rapidly increased beyond the capacity of the chairs and one lounge, students sat on the dresser on the corner, marble washing basin, and still others on the floor like the Swami himself, who thus seated cross-legged after the manner of his own country, taught his eager students the great truths of Vedanta. At last he felt that he was fairly started on his mission, which was to deliver to the Western world the message of his master Sri Ramakrishna, which proclaimed the truth and fundamental unity of all religions. The class grew so rapidly that they soon overflowed the small upstairs room, and the large double parlors below were engaged. In them the Swami taught until the end of the season. The teaching was entirely free, the necessary expenses being met by voluntary contributions. These proving insufficient to pay the rent and provide for the maintenance of the Swami, the classes came near ending for want of pecuniary support. At once the Swami announced a course of public lectures on secular subjects for which he could receive remuneration and so earn the money to support the religious classes. He explained that the Hindus regarded it as the duty of a religious teacher not only to freely give his teaching but also, if possible, could to bear the expenses of his work. In former times in India, it was even customary for the teacher to provide a home and food for his students. By this time, some of the students had become so deeply interested in the Swami's teachings that they were desirous to have them continued through the summer. He, however, was tired after a hard season's work and at first demurred against prolonging his labors through the hot weather. Then too many of the students would be out of town at this time of year. The problem solved itself. One of our number owned a small cottage at Thousand Island Park, the largest island in the Central Lawrence River, and she offered the use of it to the Swami and as many of us as it would accommodate. This plan appealed to the Swami and he agreed to join us there after a brief visit to the Mane camp of one of his friends. Miss D, the student to whom the cottage belonged, feeling that a special sanctuary should be prepared for the occasion, built as a true love offering to her teacher a new wing that was nearly as large as the original cottage. The place was ideally situated on high ground overlooking a wide sweep of the beautiful river with many of its far-famed thousand islands. Clayton could be dimly discerned in the distance while the nearer and wider Canadian shores bounded the view to the north. The cottage stood on the side of a hill which on the north and west sloped abruptly down towards the shores of the river and of a little inlet that, like small lake, lay behind the house. The house itself was literally built upon a rock and huge boulders lay all around it. The new wing stood on the steep slope of the rocks like a great lantern tower with windows on three sides, 3 stories deep at the back and only 2 in the front. The lower room was occupied by one of the students. The one over it opened out of the main part of the house by several doors, and being large and convenient became our classroom, where for hours each day the Swami gave us familiar instruction. Or this room was the one devoted exclusively to the use of the Swami in order that it might be perfectly secluded. Miss D had supplied it with a separate outside staircase, although there was also a door opening upon the second story of the piazza. This upstairs piazza stayed an important part in our lives as all the Swami's evening talks were given here. It was wide and roomy, roofed in and extended along the south and west sides of the cottage. Miss D had the west side of it carefully screened off by a partition so that none of the strangers who frequently visited the piazza to see the magnificent view it commanded could intrude upon our privacy. There, close by his own door, sat our beloved teacher every evening during our stay and communed with us, who sat silent in the darkness, eagerly drinking in his inspired words. The place was a veritable sanctuary. At our feet, like a sea of green, waved the leaves of the treetops, for the entire place was surrounded by thick woods. Not one house of the large village could be seen. It was as if we were in the heart of some dense forest, miles away from the haunts of man. Beyond the trees spread the wide expanse of the St. Lawrence, dotted here and there with islands. Some of it gleamed bright with the lights of hotels and bordering houses. All these were so far away that they seemed more like a pictured sense seen than a reality. Not a human sound penetrated our seclusion. We heard but the murmur of the insect, the sweet songs of the bird, or the gentle sight of the wind through the leaves. Part of the time the scene was illumined by the soft rays of the moon, and her face was mirrored in the shining waters beneath. In this scene of enchantment, the world forgot. We spent 7 blessed weeks with our beloved teacher listening to his words of inspiration. Immediately after our evening meal each day of our stay, we all repaired to the upper piazza and awaited the coming of our master. Nor had we long to wait for the hardly had we assembled before the door of his room would open and he would quickly step out and take his accustomed seat. He always spent 2 hours with us and more often much longer. One glorious night when the moon was about the full, he talked to us until she set below the western horizon, apparently as unconscious as we were of the lapse of time. Of these talks it was not possible to take notes. They are preserved only in the hearts of the hearers. None of us can ever forget the uplift, the intense spiritual life of those hallowed hours. The Swami poured out all his heart. All those times his own struggle were enacted again before us. The very spirit of his master seemed to speak through his lips, to satisfy all doubts, to answer all questions, to soothe every fear. Many times the Swami seemed hardly conscious of our presence, and then we almost held our breath for fear of disturbing him and checking the flow of his thoughts. He would rise from his seat and pace up and down the narrow limits of the piazza, pouring forth a perfect torrent of eloquence. Never was he more gentle, more lovable than during these hours. It may have been much like the way his own great master taught his disciples, just allowing them to listen to the outpourings of his own spirit in communion with himself. It was a perpetual inspiration to live with a man like Swami Vivekananda from morning till night. It was ever the same. We lived in a constant atmosphere of intense spirituality, often playful and fun-loving, full of merry jest and quick repartee. He was never for a moment far from the dominating note of his life. Everything could furnish a text on an illustration, and in a moment we would find ourselves swept from amusing tales of Hindu mythology to the deepest philosophy. The Swami had an inexhaustible fund of mythological lore, and surely no race is more abundantly supplied with myths than those ancient Aryans. He loved to tell them to us, and we delighted to listen, for he never failed to point out the reality hidden under myth and story and to draw from it valuable spiritual lessons. Never had fortunate students greater cause to congratulate themselves on having so gifted a teacher. By a singular coincidence, just 12 students followed the Swami to Thousand Island Park, and he told us that he accepted us as real disciples, and that was why he so constantly and freely taught us, giving us his best. All the 12 were noted together at once, 10 being the largest number present at any one time. Two of our number subsequently became sannyasis, both being initiated at Thousand Island Park. On the occasion of the consecration of the second sannyasi, Swami initiated 5 of us as brahmacharis, and later in New York City the rest of our number took initiation together with several other of the Swami's disciples there. It was decided when we went to Thousand Island Park that we should live as a community, each doing his or her share of the housework in order that no alien presence should mar the serenity of our household. The Swami himself was an accomplished cook and often prepared for us delicious dishes. He had learned how to cook when, after his master's death, he had served his brethren, a band of young men, his fellow disciples, whom he held together and taught, continuing the training begun by his master in order that they might be fit to spread abroad over the world the truths imparted by Sri Ramakrishna. Every morning, just as soon as our various tasks were over and often before, the Swami called us together in the large parlor that served us as classroom and began to teach us. Each day he took up some special subject or expounded from some sacred book as the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads or Vedanta Sutras of Vyasa. The sutras are in the form of aphorisms, being the briefest possible statement of the great truths embedded in the Vedas. They have neither nominative nor verbs, and so intent were the writers of them on eliminating every unnecessary word. That a Hindu proverb says that a writer of sutra would rather give one of his sons that add a syllable of his sutra. Because of their almost enigmatical brevity, the Vedanta Sutras offer a rich field for the commentator, and 3 great Hindu philosophers, Sankara, Ramanuja and Madhva, wrote elaborate commentaries upon them. In his morning talks, the Swami would take up first one of these commentaries, then another, showing how each commentator was guilty of twisting the meaning of the sutras to meet his own particular view, and would read in the aphorisms whatever would best substantiate his own interpretation. The Swami often pointed out to us how old is the bad habit of text torturing. Thus it was that in these lessons the point of view presented was sometimes that of pure dualism as represented by Madhava, while on another day it was that of the qualified non-dualism taught by Ramanuja, known as Visishtadvaita. Most frequently, however, the monastic commentary of Sankara was taken up, but because of his subtlety he was more difficult to understand. So to the end Ramanuja remained the favorite among the students. Sometimes the Swami took up the Bhakti Sutras of Narada. They are a short exposition of devotion to God, which gives one some conception of the lofty Hindu ideal of real, all-absorbing love, and for the Lord, love that literally possesses the devotee to the exclusion of every other thought. Bhakti is the Hindu method of realizing union with the divine, a method which naturally appeals to the devout. It is to love God and Him only. In these talks, the Swami for the first time spoke to us at length about his great master Sri Ramakrishna, of his daily life with him, and of his struggle with his own tendency. So I end the first video here. So thank you, my dear friend, for listening and watching this video with patience. Thank you so much. Please like, comment and share the video and subscribe my channel. Namaste.